Welcome to Aaron Mahnke's Cabinet of Curiosities, a production of iHeartRadio and Grim and Mild.
Our world is full of the unexplainable. And if history is an open book, all of these amazing tales are right there on display, just waiting for us to explore. Welcome to the Cabinet of Curiosities. Alexander the Great is known for his military conquests, but if you think he was just a great warrior, you're missing the forest for the trees, because Alexander's greatest talent was in his ability as a strategist and an engineer. And this was never more true than in 332 BC when Alexander laid siege to the island of Tyre. Tyre was an island nation near the modern-day border between Israel and Lebanon. It was heavily fortified on all sides, with walls that went right up to the shore. Alexander arrived from the north after conquering several coastal cities belonging to the Persian Empire. He wanted to push east and confront the Persian king, Darius, but he didn't want to leave the Persians with access to the Mediterranean. Tyre had to fall. Alexander was highly educated, having been taught by none other than the philosopher Aristotle. So while other conquerors had previously looked upon Tyre and saw an unconquerable fortress, Alexander simply saw it as a difficult problem to solve. The king and his advisors studied the landscape and realized that there were large stone ruins on the mainland left over from the original ancient incarnation of Tyre. They also noticed that there was a natural land bridge leading from the land to the island, with only a few feet of water washing over it. Alexander put two and two together and immediately started construction of a causeway using the stones from the old city. Once the causeway construction reached out about 75% of the way to the city, the builders encountered a problem. The water suddenly got much deeper, and so the causeway would now take much longer to finish. But once again, Alexander didn't give up, ordering massive towers filled with catapults and other siege weapons to be constructed on the edge of this new causeway. These protected the workers, and they battered the city while the construction continued. However, now it was the Tyrants' turn to prove their ingenuity. They sailed out toward the causeway from both their northern and their southern harbors, and as their ships got closer, Alexander's eyes went wide when he saw what they were transporting. The Tyrants had filled their ships with flammable materials, and as the ships hurtled toward the siege towers, their pilots lit the boats on fire and weighing them down in the back so that their bows would reach up out of the water and crash into the towers. The Tyrant soldiers then jumped out of the boats and swam for the safety of the city. Behind them, the flaming boats crashed into the towers, reducing them to ash and setting the causeway on fire. Alexander was enraged, but he knew that he couldn't allow his enemy to outsmart him, and so he tried a new tactic. He summoned ships from all over Greece, he split some of the larger ships into pairs, and he suspended battering rams between them with ropes. These ships then sailed toward the Tyrian walls and began swinging their battering rams between them, trying to create a breach. But once again, it was Tyre's turn to respond. This time they rolled huge boulders from their harbors up onto the walls, and then they rolled those boulders over the edge, crashing them down onto the cliffs at the base of the walls, and now the battering rams could no longer reach their target. But Alexander would not be deterred. He sent more ships to tie ropes around the boulders and tow them away. And in response, the Tyrants fired arrows that severed the ropes. And to counter this, Alexander replaced the ropes with chains. It was a game of constant one-upmanship, and it was dragging on for months, costing many, many lives. Something obviously had to give. Finally, Alexander realized that he simply needed to try all of his various methods at once, rather than focusing on one at a time. And so he sent his ships to attack the northern and southern harbors, while also battering the walls. And by this point, his workers had also finished constructing the causeway, which now went right up to the island. The Tyrants were forced to defend too many different parts of the city at once. When one of the battering rams finally breached the southern wall, troops started to pour in. And meanwhile, Alexander led his men from one of the siege towers on the causeway, taking over the walls that had challenged him for so long. And he showed no mercy when he got there either. The protracted siege had made him furious. He killed 6,000 Tyrants and crucified another 2,000. The remaining 30,000 were taken as slaves. In the end, all of his education had failed to teach him the value of human life. Curiosity leads us to wonder what Alexander might have accomplished if he had set his mind to improving lives, rather than taking them. Everyone knows the story of Camelot, but few know that there was an Eastern European kingdom with an almost equally fantastical history. And unlike Camelot, this place was real. The kingdom was known as Kievan Rus, and its impact on Europe can still be felt today. The story of this kingdom begins all the way back in the year 862, and so many of the details of the founding have been lost to time. This is most important when it comes to the ethnic makeup of the Rus people, which is still somewhat debated to this day. The most commonly accepted narrative is that the lands were settled first by the Eastern Slavs, an ethnic group from Central Europe. And these Slavs were beset on all sides by different enemy tribes and lacked the means to defend themselves. They supposedly reached a deal with a group of legendary warriors, the Vanagarians, who were Viking raiders from Sweden. The Vanagarians were invited to Novgorod to rule as kings. They took the city as their new capital. As the Vanagarian kings and Slavic villagers intermingled, they became one people, the Rus. Their leader, the Viking king Rurik, set about conquering the surrounding lands. He then sent 2 of his best warriors with an army south to conquer the legendary city of Constantinople. But on their way, they encountered a city on a hill. It was well fortified and served as a strong base from which to raid the surrounding areas. And eventually they were able to conquer the city, which was called Kiev. Now the Rus had officially become the Kievan Rus. After King Rurik died, his closest ally Oleg became regent until Rurik's young son Igor could come of age. Oleg was known for his cunning and his sense of strategy. Although his base of power was in Novgorod, Rurik's 2 generals still ruled Kiev. He conquered more and more of Eastern Europe until arriving at the southern city under a white flag. He invited the 2 generals out of Kiev to meet with him, and they foolishly complied, allowing Oleg to kill them both and take Kiev as his new capital. Oleg seemed unstoppable at this point. In fact, there was a prophecy stating that the only thing that could kill him was his prized stallion. Why that is still unclear, but even more unclear is why Oleg did what he did next. Instead of killing the stallion, he sent it to a stable in Kiev to be well cared for. After several years, word came to Oleg that the stallion had finally died of old age. And so Oleg returned to Kiev and to the stable, where they lit a funeral pyre for the horse. And once it was reduced to ash and bone, Oleg walked forward and smashed his heel down on the horse's skull. Unfortunately for him, there was a snake hiding beneath it, and it slithered out, biting him in the ankle, killing him. Rurik's son Igor came to power at that point, but he was assassinated by a rival tribe. His widow Olga, not to be confused with Oleg, set out on a legendary quest for revenge. She had emissaries from the rival tribe buried alive. She invited some of their wise men to Kiev, claiming that she wanted peace, and then trapped them in a bathhouse and burned it to the ground. But her most infamous action was when she laid siege to the capital city of the rival tribe. She had her men tie pieces of hot coal to the legs of various small birds, and when the birds flew away, they eventually nested in the trees and the rafters around the city. The hot coals came into contact with dry wood and straw, and eventually lit the entire city on fire. Olga got her revenge. At its height, the kingdom of Kievan Rus spanned from the Baltic Sea in northern Europe to the Black Sea in the south. They spread trade and culture throughout the continent. Some of the kings and queens even became saints within the Eastern Orthodox Church. But eventually, infighting between various princes left them vulnerable to invasion from the Mongols, and the kingdom was destroyed in 1240. However, the legacy of these people has still endured, and today the people of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia all claim the Kievan Rus as their common ancestor. In fact, this is a factor in the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia. The Russian state believes Ukraine belongs under their control, as they see themselves as the inheritors of the Kievan Rus legacy. And of course, Ukrainians know that they have just as much claim to that legacy as the Russians and prefer their well-deserved independence. It's a choice that shouldn't be ignored, not least of all because of the historical accuracy of it all. Because while common ground is good and valuable, it's never enough to justify taking away a nation's freedom.
I hope you've enjoyed today's guided tour of the Cabinet of Curiosities. Subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts or learn more about the show by visiting curiositiespodcast.com. This show was created by me, Aaron Mahnke, in partnership with How Stuff Works. I make another award-winning show called Lore, which is a podcast, book series, and television show, and you can learn all about it over at theworldoflore.com. And until next time, stay curious.